So I know a lot of people love to quote that we now have, I guess, more homes per capita than we did even during GFC, like at a national level. But I think there's a lot of value in looking at that same figure for a local market, and not just doing it for one market, but looking at it across markets. So, look, I'm only showing it for Davidson County here, but this is telling you quite clearly that we have more homes per capita than we had even during GFC. So this chart, it runs from 2000 to 2023, and it comes straight from the census. All I've done is trended the data. So look, yes, it's a starting point. This should, you know, cause you to dig a little bit further into the weeds. Maybe that can justify why we have so many housing units per capita. Maybe household growth can compensate for this. Well, I'm going to tell you right now, and I've talked about households ad nauseum. I think that tends to bore people. That it's not going to justify this just outsized move to the upside. You're going to see this general shape across a lot of markets, but the extent to which this has moved to the upside is something you tend to see across, a lot of markets that have certain similar demographic profiles. And what you're noticing is those are the markets that are seeing, a lot of price cuts. So look, if a realtor tries to convince you that you got to jump in right now and buy, they're just lying to you. I mean, this is the straight up math right here. Uh, and look, I think the thing that's really overwhelming about all things housing is that there's so many considerations that you need to factor into the equation. What are all the possible ways that could somehow justify, this move? I mean, has the average household size come down? Sure, it has. It's still not justifying this move. Uh, Oftentimes you see a lot of homes per capita when the population is more biased to being a little bit on the older side. You can't really say that for Davidson County. We're a younger population. Younger populations tend to show up as having like a higher concentration of renters versus homeowners. Uh, you know, that's all of those things are going to filter through to a variety of different demographic measures. Um, you know, but here's how I think about a place like Nashville, and that's Nashville proper is what I'm really referring to when I say Davidson County. That's the heart of the MSA. That's where that's the most populous county in the MSA. That's obviously where most of the homes are going to sit as well. So the way that I think about every market is just I need to be looking at the population, how it's changed over time. Is it growing organically or not? So things like natural change, um, birth deaths. Uh, if net migration is positive, or is it international or domestic? Obviously, the households that I've alluded to. What does the local employment situation look like? Well, I can tell you right now, despite the unemployment rate being at 2.9% here locally, that the private sector job growth is dead. I mean, it is virtually at zero. You know, and you can look at both measures of job growth, even at a local level, and it's showing that same trend. I don't think people understand how mechanical the unemployment rate is. And I would even push back and say a lot of folks just don't even know how that's calculated either. If you were to ask somebody, say, like, what is, how do they define unemployed people? How do they define the labor force? There are all these criterias that have to be met in order to qualify. So, uh, the other thing too is you have to consider, okay, well, maybe local incomes can afford these prices, and that is just a flat out lie as well. I mean, if you look at near term originations, you're talking stuff in the range of like mid 40s, DTIs, and sometimes higher. So, there's also permitting that you need to factor in, but also look at it across markets. That's very elevated historically. And it's not just, yes, you're seeing it on the multifamily side, but it's also elevated on the single family side as well. This is not just a multifamily problem. It's not like maybe you're only going to see it on the renter side versus home ownership, and that's going to stay tight. It just doesn't work that way. People have the option to rent or own, and though it's not as if like you can look at, especially like a county like Davidson, and just look at factors like that siloed. It makes absolutely no sense. They do trend together in terms of like, what are renter costs versus home ownership cost, because people have that option. uh, we obviously have a lot more investor activity in Nashville than we have really in the last real cycle, that is GFC. I mean, it's as if that investor model has sort of migrated to a place like Nashville. And obviously short term rentals have become quite popular in the area. They do try and track that stuff. It's not going to totally capture how many are out there. So yeah, I mean the housing stock is dynamic. It all sort of blends together. Um, but generally speaking, regardless of how you cut it, there's nothing to support this excess supply. I mean, when you go from a period of basically zero interest rates for the past 15 years, and now you suddenly have like a hurdle rate, well, that's like turning on and off demand when it comes to things like housing, because it's so sensitive to interest rates, because it ultimately comes down to what you know a household can afford in terms of a rent payment or a home ownership payment. And let me just go ahead and make it abundantly clear is that most people finance uh, their purchase in a place like Davidson. Again, all of these things are observable and measurable at a very granular level. I think that's the only, if you're going to look at it granularly, you need to line up as many of those things that you possibly can to figure out what could, absorb all of the supply. Can households afford it? Is the job market strong? What's the permitting look like? What are investors doing? What does lending look like? There are a lot of things to consider, but you really shouldn't be surprised if you just zoom out and look at structurally where we are, why active listings for sale and also for rent are just moving materially higher. Look, this is going to get worse before it gets better, and it ain't going to go in a straight line up, in terms of listings, but it's been just in a trend up, and there's a very valid reason for that. So don't listen to a realtor or maybe some like mortgage broker who's just trying to sell you something you can't afford. That's just, you're gonna have to see prices come down, because you're not gonna see wages catch up in a softening labor market. It just doesn't work that way. I mean, people are just delusional if they suggest that. And I've heard of all of these. Obviously, there's Kamala's got her own plan, and about making home ownership affordable, and which is just stupid. Uh, Unless they start like rolling out UBI, this will work itself out. It's not going to happen overnight. Don't think that it will. These things take years and years to play out. But we have a demand problem because people aren't moving here like they used to. Household growth isn't what it used to be. Lending has slowed. The job market is weak. It is what it is. Let's not be naive. So, and one more thing before I go. I know a lot of folks tend to think that I'm just bearish, maybe because I have some just hatred towards home ownership or what have you. Or maybe I'm biased even towards my hometown. And I would just say, I've looked at this across various markets. That's the only way to look at information like this. And it is pretty bad compared to a lot of other markets. It really is. Um, this is math. You need to remove whatever bias or whatever your position is on housing. I'm not against like the home builders or people in this space. Not at all. This is just telling you here and now the market in Nashville is structurally oversupplied. You know, you don't have to agree with me. This is not about my opinion. I'm showing you the numbers. It's coming straight from a government database. Do with it what you will. All right, guys, that's all I got.